The wind in the Montana Territory did not blow so much as it scoured. It was a living thing, possessing a voice that shrieked through the needlegrass and a set of teeth that chewed at the mortar between logs. It stripped the paint from wagons and the softness from faces. To live here, on the edge of the Badlands where the earth cracked open into dry red veins, was to be engaged in a permanent argument with the elements. Caleb Mercer stood on the wooden platform of the depot in Red Rock, his back to the wind, letting it carve around his shoulders. He was a man built of long, heavy bones and silence. In his early 30s, he carried himself with the careful economy of someone who knew that wasted motion cost energy. And energy was the only currency that mattered when winter came. He wore a coat that had been mended 3 times at the elbow, and his hat was pulled low, shading eyes that were the color of wet slate. He was waiting for a wife. The notion sat uneasily in his stomach, heavier than the salt pork and beans he had eaten for breakfast. Caleb was not a man given to flights of fancy. He was a man of ledgers and fence lines. He had a quarter section of land that was proving up, a small herd of Hereford cattle that were thickening well on the gamma grass, and a cabin that was too quiet when the sun went down. The Homestead Act required proof of improvement, but survival required a partner. He needed someone to manage the garden, to cure the meat, to keep the fire when he was miles out in the drift. So he had written the letter. He had been honest. He had asked for a woman who was practical, plain, and willing to work. He had offered respect and a roof. He touched the scar that ran from his left ear down to his jawline, a jagged white memory of a night in Abilene he never spoke of. He hoped she would not stare. The letter from Miss Mara Quinn had been brief. It was written in a tight, angular hand. She described herself as 26 years old, healthy and accustomed to hard labor. She claimed to seek a quiet life away from the city. The stagecoach appeared as a smudge of brown dust against the bruised purple of the horizon. Caleb watched it grow, the sound of the wheels grinding against the rutted earth, reaching him before the horses did. The vehicle rocked violently as it navigated the final turn into town, the drivers shouting curses that were snatched away by the gale. When the stage finally halted, the horses stood with their heads down, their flanks heaving steam into the chill air. The door swung open. A salesman in a plaid suit stepped out first, dusting his bowler hat with an air of offended dignity. Then she emerged. Caleb took a step forward, then stopped. The woman who stepped down onto the dusty street did not match the picture he had built in his mind. He had expected someone soft, perhaps a little downtrodden, a woman fading into the background of her own life. Mara Quinn was not fading. She hit the ground with the solid thump of boots that had been resoled until the leather was barely there. She was tall, her body lean and roped with muscle under a dark, travel-stained dress that was 2 seasons out of style. Her hair had come loose from its pins, a dark, tangled warning around a face that was burned by the sun and stripped of all vanity. She looked around the town not with curiosity, but with the sharp, darting gaze of a coyote measuring the distance to the fence line. She was checking the exits. Caleb forced himself to move. He walked toward her, removing his hat. The wind immediately whipped his dark hair across his forehead. "Miss Quinn," he said. It was not a question. She turned to him. Her eyes were green, but dark, like moss in a deep well. There was no shyness in them, only a calculation that made Caleb feel as though he were being appraised for parts. "You are Mercer?" she said. Her voice was low, raspy from the dust of the road. "I am," Caleb replied. He felt suddenly large and clumsy. "The wagon is this way. I trust your journey was tolerable." She did not answer the pleasantry. Instead, she looked past him, scanning the street where a few locals were loitering outside the saloon. "How far is the claim?" 12 miles, Caleb said. "Mostly open country. Water? We have a creek that runs year-round, and a well near the house." She nodded, a single sharp dip of her chin. Then she looked him dead in the eye, her gaze dropping to his hands, then back to his face. "Do you drink, Mr. Mercer?" Caleb blinked. "I have a whiskey now and then, never to excess." "And your temper?" she asked. The question was thrown like a knife, weighted to stick. Do you hit women when the whiskey is in you, or do you do it when you are sober? The air between them seemed to drop 10 degrees. Caleb felt a flush of heat crawl up his neck, a mix of embarrassment and sudden, defensive anger. He saw the salesman pausing to listen. He saw Mrs. Gable, the town gossip, peering through the window of the dressmaker's shop. "I do not hit women," Caleb said, his voice dropping to a rumble that he hoped only she could hear. "Drunk or sober, I wrote you that I was a decent man. I meant it." Mara held his gaze for a long second, searching for the lie. When she did not find it immediately, she exhaled, her shoulders dropping a fraction of an inch. "Good, then let us load the trunk. I have very little." She turned and hauled a battered leather trunk from the boot of the stage before Caleb could reach it. She swung it down with a grunt of effort, refusing to let the driver help her. Caleb stepped in, taking the weight from her hands. Her fingers brushed his, rough, calloused, and cold. She snatched her hand back as if he had burned her. "I can manage," she said. "I know you can," Caleb said, hoisting the trunk onto his shoulder. "But I am here, so you do not have to." He led the way to his wagon, a sturdy buckboard hitched to 2 bay geldings. As they walked through the town, Caleb felt the weight of the town's eyes. In a place like Red Rock, a mail-order bride was news. A bride who looked like she had walked out of a whirlwind was a scandal. He heard the whispers as they passed the mercantile. "Look at her hems," a woman murmured. "Ragged as a beggar." "Eyes like a cornered cat," a man chuckled. "Mercer got himself a wild one." Caleb's jaw tightened. He wanted to turn and glare them into silence, but he knew it would only feed the fire. He looked at Mara. She held her head high, her spine stiff as a rifle barrel. She did not look down. She did not acknowledge them. But Caleb saw the way her knuckles were white where she gripped her reticule. She heard them. She simply refused to bleed in front of them. He felt a strange, reluctant pull in his chest. He had wanted a plain, quiet wife to sit by the fire and mend shirts. Instead, he had this woman who walked through judgment as if it were merely bad weather. He hated that he felt ashamed of her worn dress. And he hated that he cared what the people of Red Rock thought of either of them. At the wagon, Caleb tossed the trunk into the bed. One of the geldings, a skittish young male named Buster, tossed his head and sidestepped, rattling the harness. Caleb moved to calm him, but Mara was there first. She did not flinch. She stepped up to the horse's head, murmuring something low and guttural, her hand stroking the flat of the animal's neck with a practiced rhythm. The horse settled instantly, blowing air through his nose and leaning into her palm. "He is check-shy," Mara said, running her hand down the bridle. "And this latch on the trace is cracked. It will snap if you put a heavy load on an uphill pull." Caleb stared at her, then looked at the leather trace. She was right. The iron buckle was hairline fractured. He had missed it that morning in the dark. "I will fix it with wire for the ride home," Caleb said, feeling a fresh wave of inadequacy. "Thank you." "Do not thank me," she said, climbing onto the wagon seat without waiting for his hand. "Just do not get us overturned in a gully because you did not look at your tack." Caleb climbed up beside her. He unwrapped a length of baling wire from under the seat and repaired the latch in silence. When he finished, he gathered the reins. "It is a 3-hour ride," he said. "If the mud is not too deep—" "Drive," Mara said. She was looking at the northern sky, where clouds the color of a fresh bruise were gathering. "That sky says we have less than 4 hours before the sleet starts. The wind has shifted to the north." Caleb clicked his tongue, and the horses lurched forward. They left the town of Red Rock behind, rolling out into the vast, indifferent emptiness of the territory. The conversation died as the buildings faded. The silence that stretched between them was not the companionable silence Caleb was used to. It was thick and heavy, filled with the things they were not saying. He drove with his eyes on the road, but he was acutely aware of her presence beside him. She smelled of lye soap and stale dust, a scent that was entirely devoid of flowers or sweetness. The landscape opened up, rolling hills of sage and scrub brush, giving way to the broken teeth of the Badlands in the distance. The wind was relentless. It tore at Mara's shawl, but she did not pull it tighter. She sat with her hands folded in her lap, watching the horizon. Caleb noticed her hands were shaking. At first, he thought it was the cold. Then, as the wagon hit a rut and she grabbed the bench to steady herself, he saw the tremor was deeper than that. It was the shaking of a muscle held too tight for too long. She was exhausted. She looked like someone who had not slept in a week, someone running on pure, distilled will. "There is food in the sack behind the seat," Caleb said, breaking the silence. "Biscuits and dried beef." "I am not hungry," she said. Her stomach growled loud enough to be heard over the creak of the wheels. She ignored it. "Eat," Caleb said gently. "The wind takes the heat out of you. You cannot work if you are empty." She hesitated, then reached back and took a piece of hardtack biscuit. She ate it slowly, guarding the food with her hand as if she expected someone to snatch it away. "Where are you from, Miss Quinn?" Caleb asked. "Your letter said Kansas." "I was in Kansas for a time," she said. "Before that, other places." "And what brings a woman like you to a place like this?" She turned to him, her eyes narrowing. "A woman like me?" "A woman who knows horses and reads weather," Caleb said. "Most mail-order brides are city girls looking for a storybook life. You look like you know exactly what this life is." "I know that the world is hard everywhere," Mara said. "And I know that a marriage contract is safer than being alone on the road. I want a roof that locks Mr. Mercer, and I want work that belongs to me. That is all." "Caleb," he said. "My name is Caleb." She did not say his name back. The sun began to dip, bleeding crimson across the underside of the storm clouds. The temperature plummeted. Coyotes began to sing in the coulees, their yips echoing off the rocks. At the sound, Mara stiffened. Her hand went to her throat, touching something hidden beneath her high collar. "Just coyotes," Caleb said. "They will not come near the wagon." "I know what they are," she whispered. But she did not relax until the sound faded. They reached the ranch line just as the light was failing. The cabin sat in a shallow depression, sheltered by a stand of cottonwoods. It was a solid structure of hewn logs with a stone chimney and a sod roof that was currently thick with dried grass. A barn and a corral stood 50 yards away. Caleb pulled the team to a halt. "Home," he said. Mara looked at the cabin. She let out a breath that ghosted white in the air. "It has a solid door." "Oak," Caleb said. "And a crossbar." She nodded and climbed down. Her legs buckled when she hit the ground, but she caught herself on the wheel before Caleb could reach her. She pushed herself upright and began to unbuckle the traces on the horses. "Go inside," Caleb said. "I will tend the team." "We share the work," she said through gritted teeth. "That is the deal." "The deal starts tomorrow," Caleb said firmly. "Tonight, you go inside and light the stove. The wood is in the box. Go!" She looked ready to argue, but the cold was biting through her thin dress. She turned and marched to the cabin. By the time Caleb came in, the iron stove was ticking with heat, and a lantern was casting a golden glow over the single room. It was a tidy space, a table, 2 chairs, a washstand, and a bed in the corner covered in a buffalo robe. Mara was standing by the window, looking out into the dark. She had not taken off her coat. Caleb hung his hat on a peg. The intimacy of the room felt sudden and overwhelming. He had lived here alone for 5 years. Now, this wild, sharp-edged woman was standing in his kitchen, filling the space with her tension. "The bed is yours," Caleb said, gesturing to the corner. "I made up a pallet on the floor for myself." Mara turned, her eyes wide. "I do not need your charity. We are married. People will expect—" "We are married on paper," Caleb interrupted. "We have not stood before the preacher yet. I will not touch you. Mara. Not until you are ready, and not until it is done right in the eyes of the town. You take the bed. You need the sleep." She stared at him, confusion warring with relief on her face. "Why?" "Because I am not the men you have known before," Caleb said. He moved to the washstand and poured water from the pitcher into the basin. He rolled up his sleeves. On his right knuckle, a scrape from the harness buckle was oozing a bright bead of blood. He dipped his hands into the water. He felt her eyes on him. She was watching him wash the blood away, her gaze fixed on the red swirl in the water. She watched his hands, large, scarred, but moving with a deliberate gentleness. "You are bleeding," she said. "It is nothing," Caleb said. He dried his hands on a rough towel. He moved to the stove and ladled stew from the pot he had left simmering at the back of the range before he left that morning. He filled 2 tin plates. He set one on the table, then paused and added a second large scoop of potatoes and beef to her plate. He placed it at the seat nearest the fire. "Sit," he said. They ate in silence. Mara ate quickly, wiping the plate clean with a piece of bread. Caleb watched her, noting the way she kept her back to the solid log wall, her eyes flicking to the window every time the wind rattled the frame. "Tomorrow," Caleb said, pushing his empty plate away. "We have to ride out to the north line. I need to check the fencing in the box canyon before the weather turns bad for good. It will be a hard day." "I can ride," she said. "I do not doubt it." Later, as the fire burned down to embers, Caleb lay on his bedroll on the floorboards. He listened to the sounds of the house, the wind outside, the settling of the logs, and the sound of the strange woman in his bed, breathing in shallow, jagged rhythms. She was asleep, but even in sleep, she sounded like she was running. The next morning broke gray and iron hard. The wind had not ceased. It had sharpened. They drank black coffee that was thick enough to chew. Mara looked better after a few hours of sleep, though the shadows under her eyes were still dark bruises. She had braided her hair tight against her skull and put on a heavy canvas jacket Caleb had offered her. It swallowed her frame, but she rolled the cuffs up without complaint. They rode out on 2 saddle horses, leaving the wagon behind. Caleb rode a roan gelding, and he put Mara on a steady mare named Bess, as he had suspected. She sat a horse as if she had been born in the saddle, her body moving in perfect fluid sync with the animal's gait. They rode north, toward the Badlands. The grass here was yellow and brittle, whistling in the wind. About 3 miles from the ranch, they saw a rider approaching. It was Old Man Titus, a neighbor who lived in a dugout 10 miles to the east. He pulled his mule up as they neared. Titus was a collection of rags and beard, with eyes that had seen too much sun. "Mercer," Titus croaked, nodding. He looked at Mara, his eyes widening. "And this must be the bride." "Miss Quinn," Caleb said. "This is Titus." Mara nodded but did not speak. She moved her horse slightly so that Caleb was between her and the stranger. "You got word yet?" Titus asked, ignoring her and looking at Caleb. "Word of what?" "Rourke." Titus spat the name. "Silas Rourke's boys were through here yesterday, checking brands. Said they were looking for rustlers, but they were looking at everything else too. Rourke's buying up debt. Caleb, he's squeezing the small holds." Caleb frowned. "My claim is clear. I owe no man." "Doesn't matter to Rourke," Titus said. He lowered his voice, leaning over his saddle horn. "And he's got a new deputy in his pocket, man named Hale, mean as a rattlesnake." Titus cast a sideways glance at Mara. "You be careful, Caleb. A wild woman brings wild trouble. Rourke notices anything that don't fit. Best you keep her close, or send her back before she draws his eye." Caleb felt a flash of anger. "Miss Quinn is my concern. Titus, you worry about your own stock." Titus shrugged. "Just saying. The wind carries sense. Mercer, and Rourke is a wolf." He kicked his mule and rode on. Mara was silent as they continued riding. Caleb glanced at her. Her jaw was set so hard a muscle jumped in her cheek. "Who is Rourke?" she asked finally. "A rich man who thinks he is a king." Caleb said, "He owns half the valley. He likes to think he owns the people in it too." "And does he?" "Not me," Caleb said. "And not you." They reached the box canyon by noon. The walls rose up steep and red, cutting off the wind. They spent hours mending the wire fence that kept Caleb's cattle from wandering into the treacherous ravines beyond. Mara worked beside him, stretching the wire, holding the posts while he hammered. She was strong for her size, and she did not complain when the barbs tore at her gloves. By mid-afternoon, the sky turned a bruised, sickly green. The air pressure dropped so fast Caleb's ears popped. "Storm," Mara said, pointing. "It is moving fast." A wall of white was rushing toward them from the north, consuming the landscape. "We need to get back," Caleb said. "Now." They mounted up and spurred the horses into a gallop. They were halfway home when the storm hit. It was not snow. It was hail. Stones the size of marbles driving sideways on a 60-mile-an-hour wind. The horses panicked. The roar was deafening. The ground, already slick with freezing rain, turned to grease. They reached a washout, a dry creek bed that was now a torrent of mud and ice water. The trail narrowed dangerously along the edge. "Keep close," Caleb shouted over the roar of the wind. Mara's mare slipped. The back legs went out, sliding toward the drop-off into the churning water below. The horse screamed, scrabbling for purchase. Mara was thrown sideways, half out of the saddle. She clung to the mane, her legs dangling over the edge. "Mara!" Caleb yelled. He drove his horse alongside, risking his own footing. He reached out, his hand closing around her upper arm. At the contact, she froze. It was not a hesitation. It was a total shutdown. Her eyes went wide and vacant, her breath hitching in a terrified gasp. Her muscles locked rigid. She did not reach for him. She stared at his hand gripping her arm as if it were a shackle. In that split second, Caleb saw it, the sheer, blinding terror of a woman who has learned that a man's grip means pain. "I have you," Caleb roared, his voice cutting through the storm and her panic. "I have you, Mara! Let go of the mane! I have you!" She blinked, the present moment crashing back in. She looked at his face, wet with rain, eyes wide with fear. Not for himself, but for her. She forced herself to exhale. She forced her fingers to uncurl from the horse's mane. Caleb hauled her backward with a grunt of effort, pulling her clear of the mare just as the horse found its footing and scrambled up the bank. Mara slammed into Caleb's chest, her body shaking violently. He did not let go. He held her firmly against him, steadying her as the horses huddled together against the hail. "I have you," he repeated, softer now, though the wind still screamed. "You are safe." She leaned into him, just for a moment, her forehead pressing against his wet coat. She was trembling, but she was not pulling away. For the first time since she had stepped off the stage, she was not checking the exits. She was just holding on. The morning sun did not bring warmth to the Montana territory. It merely illuminated the frost. The storm had passed, leaving the world scoured and brittle, the mud frozen into jagged ruts that twisted ankles and jarred spines. Caleb Mercer woke before the light, the habit of years dragging him from the warmth of the buffalo robe. He looked across the dim room. The bed in the corner was a mound of quilts. Mara was still there, buried deep. He moved silently, pulling on his boots and kindling the fire in the iron stove. When the coffee was boiling, thick and black, he went out to the barn. The reality of the ranch was a relentless arithmetic of survival. There were 3 horses to feed, 20 head of cattle to locate in the scrub, and water to be drawn from a well that fought him every inch of the way. When Caleb returned to the cabin an hour later, his hands were red and stiff with cold. Mara was awake. She was already working. She had swept the floor, the rough bristles of the broom scraping against the wood with a rhythmic, determined sound. She had found the flour sack and was rolling out biscuits on the tabletop. "Coffee is hot," Caleb said, hanging his coat by the door. She nodded, but did not stop rolling the dough. "I found the salt pork. It is low." "We will buy more in town when we go for the license," Caleb said. He watched her as he drank from his tin cup. She moved with a jagged energy, efficient but brittle. Her face was pale, the skin pulled tight over her cheekbones. When the biscuits were done and fried in the skillet, she placed 3 on his plate and 1 on hers. "Take another," Caleb said. "I am not hungry," she said. It was a lie. He had seen her eyes track the food as she served him. She was rationing herself, a habit born of scarcity he could not yet understand. Mara, he said, his voice dropping to that low rumble that seemed to vibrate in the timber walls. The flour is there to be eaten. We are not starving. Eat. She hesitated, her hand hovering over the plate. Then, with a defiant set to her jaw, she took a second biscuit. She ate it quickly, tearing it apart with her fingers, her eyes fixed on the window as if daring the landscape to take it back. As the days turned into a week, Caleb began to see the shape of the woman he had brought into his home. She was not the domestic creature the books described. She did not hum while she worked. She attacked chores as if they were enemies to be subdued. One afternoon, a heifer got herself tangled in a mess of old barbed wire down in the creek bed. Caleb was struggling with the cutters, the wire deeply embedded in the animal's thick hide. The heifer was thrashing, dangerous and panicked. "Hold her head," Caleb shouted, wrestling with the wire. Mara did not just hold the head. She grabbed a length of rope from the saddlebag, moved in close to the kicking hooves, and threw a knot around the animal's back legs with a speed that blurred in the air. She cinched it tight, immobilizing the heifer instantly. It was not a knot a housewife knew. It was a diamond hitch variant, used by packers and drovers who moved heavy loads over bad ground. Caleb cut the wire free and stepped back, breathing hard. The heifer scrambled up and bolted. Caleb looked at the knot in the rope before untying it. He looked at Mara. She was wiping mud from her skirt, her face carefully blank. "That is a packer's knot," Caleb said. "Where did a woman from Kansas learn to tie down 1,000 pounds of beef?" Mara froze for a second, then continued brushing at her skirt. "I watched men work," she said. "I learn fast." "You shoot fast too," Caleb said. "I saw you take the head off a rattlesnake yesterday at 20 paces with a revolver. That is not watching. That is doing." She stopped moving. She straightened, meeting his gaze. The wind whipped strands of dark hair across her face. "Do you want me to be helpless? Mr. Mercer, would you prefer I scream when the snake strikes?" "No," Caleb said quietly. "I want to know who is watching my back." "A woman who wants to live," she said. "That is all you need to know." But it was not all. The silence between them was not empty. It was filled with questions Caleb was too polite to ask, and Mara was too guarded to answer. She pushed the boundaries of his patience, testing him, waiting for the temper she was sure he possessed. That evening, as the fire snapped in the grate, she pushed harder. "You live like a monk," she said, looking around the sparse cabin. "You work until your hands bleed. You speak only when necessary, and you have a scar on your face that looks like it was made by a skinning knife, yet you claim you are just a simple homesteader." Caleb looked up from the harness he was oiling. "I am a homesteader." "You are hiding," she said. Her voice was sharp, probing. "Just like me, but you demand my truth while keeping yours locked in a box." Caleb set the harness down. The leather creaked in the silence. He looked at the fire, the flames reflecting in his dark eyes. He could lie. He could tell her it was a farming accident, but he remembered the terror in her eyes during the storm, the way she had flinched when he touched her arm. Lies would not build a floor strong enough to hold them. "I was in Abilene," Caleb said. The words tasted like ash. 10 years ago. I was young and I thought I was hard. There was a card game. A man thought I was cheating. I was not." Mara sat very still, her hands resting in her lap. "He pulled a knife," Caleb continued, touching the jagged line on his jaw. "He opened my face. He was drunk and he was slow. I was not drunk. I broke his neck. The log in the fire settled with a shower of sparks." "It was a fair fight," Caleb said, his voice devoid of emotion. "The law said so, but the law does not wash your hands. I killed a man. Mara, I felt the life go out of him, and I found that I did not like the part of me that was good at it, so I came here. I walk away from fights now. I keep my head down." He looked at her, expecting fear. Instead, he saw a strange, dark recognition in her eyes. "You killed to survive," she said. "There is no shame in that." "There is a cost," Caleb said. "There is always a cost," she replied. The trick is finding someone else to pay it. 2 days later, they rode into Red Rock to make it legal. The town had not changed in the week they had been gone. It was still a collection of weather-beaten wood and prejudices held together by mud. The wind still blew. They went to the small white church that doubled as the courthouse on weekdays. Reverend Caldwell was a thin man with spectacles that magnified his watery eyes. He looked at Mara's worn boots and Caleb's scarred face with a pinched expression, as if he smelled something rotting under the floorboards. "Do you, Caleb Mercer, take this woman?" the Reverend asked, his tone implying that Caleb was making a grave error. "I do," Caleb said. His voice was steady. "And do you, Mara Quinn, take this man?" Mara looked at Caleb. For a moment, her mask slipped. She looked tired. She looked at his shoulders, broad and heavy, and the way he stood between her and the door. "I do," she said. He signed the ledger. She signed beneath him. Her signature was jagged, the letters leaning forward like they were running into the wind. When they walked out onto the wooden steps, the air felt heavier. The town knew. In a place this small, privacy was a myth. A mail-order bride was one thing. A woman who looked like Mara, with her sunburned face and man's stride, was another. They walked to the mercantile to buy the supplies. The bell above the door jingled falsely bright. Inside, the air smelled of dry goods, coffee beans, and judgment. 2 women were examining a bolt of calico fabric near the counter. One was Mrs. Gable. She turned, saw Mara, and audibly sniffed. She turned her back, pulling her skirts in as if Mara were contagious. Caleb felt a heat rise in his chest. He stepped forward, but Mara was already moving. She walked past the women to the counter, her head high. 50 pounds of flour, Mara said to the shopkeeper, and 10 of salt pork. The shopkeeper, a balding man named Mr. Henderson, did not look her in the eye. He looked past her to Caleb. "That will be put on your account. Mr. Mercer." "Mrs. Mercer is speaking to you," Caleb said, his voice hard. "You can look at her." Henderson cleared his throat, flushing pink. "Of course, 50 pounds. From the back of the store, near the barrel of whiskey." A voice drifted out. It was distinct, slurred, and ugly. "Mercer buying used goods," the voice sneered. "Reckon she came cheap. Looks like she's been ridden hard and put away wet." The silence in the store was absolute. Caleb turned slowly. The man was a drifter, one of the seasonal hands that drifted through the territory. He was leaning back, a smirk on his face, chewing on a toothpick. Caleb's hands curled into fists at his sides, the old violence, the cold thing he kept buried in the cellar of his soul, rattled the door. He took a step toward the man. "Caleb!" Mara's voice was like a whip crack. She was not looking at the man. She was looking at Caleb. Her eyes were blazing. "Do not," she said. "He insulted you," Caleb said, his voice vibrating. "He is a fool with a mouthful of whiskey," Mara said. She turned to the man. She did not raise her voice. She did not shout. She looked him up and down with a cold, clinical distaste, as if he were a horse with a broken leg. "I have survived blizzards, droughts, and men with far more power than you," she said. "Your words are like the wind in this town, empty and dirt cheap." She turned back to the counter. "The flour, Mr. Henderson. We are in a hurry." The drifter blinked, his smirk faltering. He had expected tears, or perhaps a screaming match. He had not expected to be dismissed as irrelevant. The women by the fabric bolt stared, mouths slightly open. Caleb stood there, his heart hammering against his ribs. He wanted to break the man's jaw, but he looked at Mara, standing rigid at the counter, refusing to let them see her bleed. He realized that fighting the man would only prove the town right, that they were wild, violent people. Mara was fighting a different war. He stepped up beside her. He placed his hand on the counter, next to hers. "Add a tin of peaches," Caleb said to the clerk. "And a new ribbon, blue, for my wife." The ride home was quiet, but the quality of the silence had shifted. The hostility of the town had pushed them into the same trench. Over the next few weeks, A strange, tentative domesticity began to take root in the cabin. It was not the soft, decorative home life of the magazines. It was a partnership of survival. Mara began to change the space. She mixed mud and straw and patched the drafty cracks around the window frame, stopping the whistle of the wind. She found a patch of hardy sage and wild mint near the creek and transplanted them into a wooden box by the door. She took Caleb's torn shirts, the ones he had clumsily stitched with fishing line, and mended them with tiny, invisible stitches. Caleb would come in from the cold to find the cabin warm, the smell of drying herbs cutting the scent of wood smoke. He would watch her sitting by the fire, her head bent over her work, and feel a tightness in his chest that had nothing to do with the weather. He was grateful, and he was terrified. The first shift happened on a Tuesday night. The wind was howling outside, a banshee scream that made the logs groan. Inside, the lamp cast a circle of yellow light over the table. They were sitting close, the table small enough that their knees were almost touching. Caleb was repairing a bridle. Mara was darning a sock. The silence was comfortable. Caleb looked up. The light caught the curve of Mara's cheek, softening the hard lines of her face. She looked younger in the lamplight, less hunted. A loose strand of dark hair had fallen across her eyes. She blew it away, but it fell back. Without thinking, Caleb reached out. His hand moved toward her face. He meant to tuck the hair behind her ear. It was a gesture of simple affection, something a husband might do. His fingers brushed the air an inch from her skin. Mara went still. She did not flinch this time. She did not pull away. She looked up, her eyes locking onto his. Her breathing stopped. Caleb froze. His hand hovered there, large and scarred, caught between intent and retreat. He saw the pulse fluttering in the hollow of her throat. "Mara," he whispered. She did not speak. She leaned forward, just a fraction of an inch. It was a dare. It was a surrender. She leaned into the space where his hand was, bridging the gap until her skin brushed his rough fingertips. The contact was electric. It shocked through Caleb like a lightning strike on a dry fence line. He cupped her cheek. Her skin was rough from the wind but warm. Her eyes were wide, dark, searching his face for any sign of the violence she feared. He leaned in. She did not retreat. Their lips met. It was not a gentle, courtly kiss. It was the collision of two people who had been starving for a long time. It was brief, hard, and desperate. Caleb tasted coffee and fear and a sudden, overwhelming sweetness. He pulled back, his breath coming ragged. He was shaken by the intensity of it, by how much he wanted to pull her out of that chair and onto the buffalo robe. Mara stared at him, her lips parted, her hand rising to touch her mouth. She looked terrified, not of him, but of the want in her own eyes. Caleb started, his voice cracking. "I should check the horses." He stood up so fast his chair scraped loudly against the floor. He grabbed his coat and bolted for the door, needing the cold air to cool the fire in his blood. Mara stayed at the table, touching her cheek where his hand had been. The intimacy brought new dangers. The closer they got, the more the secrets chafed. 2 days later, Mara was washing up at the basin. She had unbuttoned the top of her high collar to scrub her neck. Caleb came in from the porch, carrying an armful of wood. He turned to put the wood in the box and glanced at her. She had a locket around her neck, a small, tarnished silver oval on a leather thong. She usually kept it hidden, but as she bent forward, it swung loose, and below it, on the pale skin of her collarbone, Caleb saw the mark. It was a scar, but it was not a clean line like his. It was a burn mark, circular and puckered, old and faded but unmistakable. It looked like the mark of a cigar tip, pressed into skin and held there. Caleb dropped a piece of firewood. The clatter made Mara spin around, clutching her collar closed. "What is it?" she snapped, her eyes darting to his face. Caleb stared at her hand clutching the fabric. He felt a cold knot of nausea in his stomach. He knew violence. He knew the difference between a wound from a fall and a wound from cruelty. "Nothing," Caleb lied. Just slipped. He knelt to pick up the wood, his heart hammering with a new, dark rage. Someone had hurt her. Someone had branded her. The realization made him want to burn the world down. The outside world, however, was not finished with them. The following week, a rider appeared on the ridge. He rode a tall gray gelding and wore a badge that caught the sun. Deputy Tom Hale was a man who smiled with his mouth but never with his eyes. He was young, handsome in a slick, city way, with a mustache that was waxed to sharp points. He worked for the sheriff, but everyone in the county knew he belonged to Silas Rourke. He rode into the yard just as Caleb was chopping wood. Mara was on the porch, shaking out a rug. "Afternoon," Hale called out, swinging down from his horse with practiced ease. He tipped his hat to Mara. "Mrs. Mercer, a pleasure to see a lady's touch on this place." Mara went still. She folded the rug slowly, her eyes fixing on Hale like he was a wolf at the tree line. "Deputy," Caleb said, driving the axe into the stump. "What brings you out?" "Just riding the rounds," Hale said, walking closer. He moved with a swagger that set Caleb's teeth on edge. "Mister, Rourke likes to make sure the new families are settling in well. Heard you got hitched. Wanted to pay my respects." Hale's eyes drifted over Mara, lingering on her figure in a way that felt like a physical touch. "You have done well for yourself. Mercer, she is a fine-looking woman. A bit sturdy, maybe, but that is good for the winters. State your business." "Hale," Caleb said, stepping between the deputy and the porch. Hale smiled, showing white teeth. "Just checking. Caleb, just checking. You know, we have had reports of some unsavory types drifting in from the territories. Women with debts. Women running from the law. Just making sure everything is legitimate." He looked past Caleb to Mara. "You have papers, I assume. Mrs. Mercer? Identification?" "My husband has my papers," Mara said. Her voice was flat, metallic. "Of course," Hale said. "Well, I will be seeing you around. Rourke is expanding his grazing rights to the south. We will be neighbors, in a way." He mounted his horse. He looked down at Mara one last time. "You take care now. It is a dangerous country for a woman with a past." He rode off, whistling. Mara stood on the porch, her face gray. She dropped the rug. "He knows," she whispered. "He knows nothing," Caleb said, though he did not believe it. "He is fishing. He is a hunter," Mara said. She turned to Caleb, gripping his arm. Her fingers dug into his muscle. "You need to clean the rifles. Caleb, not just the shotgun, the repeaters. And we need to keep the horses in the corral at night, not the pasture. Mara, you are safe here," Caleb said, trying to soothe her. "No," she hissed. "Men like that do not come to talk about grazing rights. He was measuring the drop on you. He was counting the exits." Caleb looked at the dust settling behind the deputy. He felt a crushing weight of guilt. He had promised her a home. He had promised safety. And now, the very ground they stood on felt like a trap. He hated that he could not dismiss her fear as hysteria. He knew men like Hale, and he knew that Mara was right. That night, the wind died, leaving a silence that was even louder. Caleb lay on his pallet, staring at the ceiling. He had cleaned the Winchester repeater. It was leaning against the wall, loaded. He heard Mara tossing in the bed. She was whimpering, low sounds of distress that tore at his heart. Then she screamed. It was a raw, blood-curdling sound. Caleb was on his feet in a second. "Mara!" She scrambled out of the bed, tangled in the quilts, her eyes wide and unseeing. She was asleep, but she was fighting. She flailed at the air, striking invisible hands. "No, no, I paid! I paid!" she shrieked. She bolted for the door. She was running blind, fueled by a nightmare that was bleeding into the room. Caleb moved to intercept her. He stepped in front of the door. She slammed to a halt, seeing a large, dark figure blocking her escape. She gasped, shrinking back, raising her hands to protect her face. She was trembling so hard her teeth chattered. "Let me out," she sobbed. "Please, let me out." Caleb stood there, His instinct was to grab her, to shake her awake, to hold her until she stopped shaking. But he remembered the horse. He remembered the flinch. If he grabbed her now, he would be just another man using his strength to hold her down. He lowered his hands. He stood perfectly still, a solid shadow against the wood. "I am not stopping you, Mara," he said softly. "The door is not locked, but you are awake. You are in our cabin. There is no one here but me." She stared at him, her chest heaving. She looked at the door. She looked at his empty hands. She looked at his face, illuminated by the dying embers of the fire. She blinked, the nightmare slowly receding, replaced by the reality of the rough-hewn logs and the man who was refusing to touch her without permission. "Caleb," she whispered. "I am here," he said. "I am right here." She let out a long, broken sound. She took a step toward him, then another. Her legs gave out. She collapsed forward. Caleb caught her. He did not grab. He simply received her weight as she fell into him. He slid down the wall with her, settling onto the floorboards, pulling the quilt around her shoulders. She buried her face in his chest, sobbing, deep, wrenching sobs that shook her entire body. It was the sound of a dam breaking. Caleb held her. He rested his chin on the top of her head, rocking her slightly. He felt the dampness of her tears on his shirt. He felt the trust she was placing in him, heavy and fragile as glass. "I have you," he murmured into the dark. "I have you." Outside, a wolf howled, closer than before. Caleb tightened his hold, his eyes open, staring into the shadows, ready to tear the throat out of anything that tried to hurt her again. Winter arrived not as a guest, but as a siege. The change in the landscape was absolute. The rolling grasslands, once a sea of cured yellow swaying in the wind, were now locked under a crust of early snow that crunched like broken glass beneath a boot heel. The sky lowered itself, pressing down on the valley with a heavy, leaden gray that seemed to swallow sound. Life on the ranch narrowed to a brutal arithmetic. How many logs for the fire? How many scoops of oats for the horses? How many bullets for the wolves that had grown bold enough to skirt the edge of the corral in the blue twilight? Caleb Mercer stood by the barn door, watching the ridgeline. The breath left his lungs in thick white plumes. He had seen the tracks that morning, large pads, deep in the drift, circling the heifer pen. The wolves were testing the wire. They were measuring the defenses. Mara came out of the cabin, a wool shawl wrapped tight around her head and shoulders, carrying a pail of steaming mash for the chickens. She moved differently now. The frantic, cornered energy of her arrival had settled into a grim, efficient endurance. She walked with her weight forward, fighting the wind that never seemed to stop. She poured the mash, scraping the pail clean, then walked over to stand beside him. She did not speak immediately. She followed his gaze to the tree line. "They are closer," she said. It was a statement of fact, devoid of panic. "Hunger makes them stupid," Caleb said. "Or brave. I will set the traps along the creek line tonight." Mara nodded. She looked at his hands, resting on the top rail of the fence. They were cracked from the cold, the knuckles raw. "I can help you set them. I know how to hide the scent with wood ash." Caleb looked at her. "Where does a woman learn to trap wolves? Mara?" She turned her face to the wind, her eyes narrowing against the biting grit. "In the mining camps," she said. "Up in the Dakota Territory, I spent a winter in a place called Deadwood. The wolves there had 2 legs, mostly, but you learned to set traps for the 4-legged ones if you wanted to keep your meat." It was the first time she had named a place. Deadwood, a rough, lawless scar on the map where gold dust bought anything, including silence. "You were alone there?" Caleb asked. He kept his voice neutral, looking at the horizon so she would not feel pinned by his gaze. "I was running," she said. "I learned that if you move fast enough and keep your mouth shut, people forget you are there. I washed clothes. I cooked. I learned that men with power are the same in a silk vest or a canvas coat. They think the world is something they can put in their pocket." She paused, her hand coming up to touch the hidden shape of the locket beneath her coat. "There was a man there," she said, her voice dropping so low the wind almost took it. He offered me protection, a warm room. He said it was charity, but there is no charity in those places. Caleb, there is only debt, and when you try to leave, you find out the door was locked from the outside a long time ago. Caleb felt a muscle jump in his jaw. He wanted to ask his name. He wanted to know who had put the shadow in her eyes. But he sensed the fragility of the moment. She was offering him a piece of the truth, jagged and sharp. If he grabbed for it, she would pull back. "You got out," Caleb said. "I climbed a window," she said. "I stole a horse. I rode until the horse died, and then I walked. I have been walking ever since." She looked up at him then. The fear was there, deep down, but it was overlaid with a fierce, terrifying exhaustion. "I am tired of walking. Caleb—" "Then you stop," Caleb said. He reached out and covered her gloved hand with his own on the fence rail. "You are here. The door is locked from the inside now, and I have the key." She looked at his hand covering hers. She did not pull away, but she did not relax. "Men like that," she said softly, "they have long reaches, and they do not like to lose what they think they own." The trouble did not come from the past. Initially, it came from town. 3 days later, they hitched the wagon to go into Red Rock. The supplies were dangerously low. They needed flour, coffee, and salt to cure the last of the venison. The trip was a necessity, not a choice. The town was huddled against the cold, smoke pumping from every chimney. The streets were frozen mud as they walked toward the mercantile. Caleb felt the eyes on them. It was heavier than before. The gossip had curdled into something sour. They entered the store. The warmth was stifling after the ride. Mr. Henderson was behind the counter, weighing nails for a farmer. When he saw Mara, his hands stilled. He wiped them on his apron, his eyes darting to the back of the store. "Mr. Mercer," Henderson said. His voice was tight. "Mrs. Mercer. Henderson." Caleb nodded. "We need 50 pounds of flour and coffee." Mara moved to the dry goods section. Examining a bolt of flannel, she needed warm layers. She reached out to touch the fabric, checking the weave. "Do not touch what you cannot buy," a voice said. Deputy Hale stepped out from behind a stack of crates. He was smiling, but his eyes were flat and hard, like polished stones. He was chewing on a matchstick. Mara withdrew her hand slowly. "I am checking the quality. Deputy, that is customary." "For paying customers," Hale said. He moved closer. Invading her space, he smelled of bay rum and stale tobacco. "But we have had some inventory go missing lately, Mrs. Mercer. Small things, silver buttons, a pocket watch. Funny how things disappear when strangers come to town." The store had gone quiet. The farmer with the nails watched, eyes wide. Caleb stepped between them. He moved with deceptive slowness, placing his large frame as a shield. "Are you accusing my wife of something, Hale?" "Just doing my job." "Mercer," Hale said, looking up at Caleb with a sneer. "Just asking questions. Maybe she should turn out her pockets, just to be sure." "She will do no such thing," Caleb said. His voice was a low growl. "We are here to buy flour. If you have a warrant, show it. If not, step back." "I don't need a warrant to stop a thief," Hale said. He lunged forward, grabbing for Mara's arm. It was a setup. Caleb saw it a second too late. Hale wasn't trying to find stolen goods. He was trying to provoke a fight. He wanted Caleb to swing. He wanted a reason. Mara was faster. She twisted away from Hale's grip, but as she moved, Hale's other hand flashed out and knocked her reticule from her grasp. It hit the floor, spilling its contents, a handkerchief, a few coins, and a silver pocket watch that slid across the floorboards. The silence was deafening. Hale laughed. It was a dry, triumphant sound. "Well now, look at that. Sheriff Miller's missing watch. I wondered where that got to." "I did not take that," Mara said. Her face was white, her eyes blazing with shock and rage. "He planted it. You saw him. He knocked the bag and dropped it." "I saw nothing of the sort," Hale said smoothly. He bent and picked up the watch. "I saw a thief getting caught. Sheriff Miller, A heavy man with a face like a bulldog, lumbered in from the street, drawn by the noise. He looked at the watch in Hale's hand, then at Mara. "That's my watch," Miller grunted. "You stealing from the law now, girl?" "It is a lie," Caleb said. His hands were curled into fists at his sides. The violence was roaring in his ears, a red tide rising. He wanted to tear Hale's throat out. He could do it. He could break him before the sheriff cleared leather. But he saw the way Hale's hand hovered near his gun. He saw the gleam of anticipation in the deputy's eyes. They wanted him to fight. They wanted to kill him in self-defense and leave Mara alone in a cell. Caleb forced his hands to open. The effort made his arms tremble. "She did not take it," Caleb said, his voice shaking with restrained fury. Hale threw it when he grabbed her. "Mr. Henderson saw it. The farmer saw it." He turned to the shopkeeper. "Henderson, tell them." Henderson looked at the floor. He shuffled his feet. I was weighing nails. Caleb, I didn't see clear. Cowardice. It was a thick, suffocating blanket in the room. "You are coming with us," Miller said, reaching for Mara. "No," Caleb said. He stepped forward, his hand resting on the sheriff's chest. It was a gentle touch, but immovable. "You are not putting her in a cell. Miller, you know this is a game. You know Hale. If you take her, you take me. And if you take me, I will make sure the circuit judge hears about how you run this town when he comes through in spring." Miller hesitated. He was corrupt, but he was also lazy. And he knew Caleb Mercer was a man who paid his taxes and had never caused trouble. Arresting a homesteader for a petty theft that looked like a setup was paperwork. Arresting Caleb Mercer after a bloodbath was a career ender. "Fine," Miller spat. "Take her home. But she doesn't come back into this town until this is sorted. And if anything else goes missing, Mercer, I won't be asking nicely." "Get out," Hale whispered to Mara, leaning close. "Run along, little bird, before the cage closes." They walked out. The shame burned hotter than the wind. People were watching from the windows. They had seen the confrontation. They saw the guilt in the way they were leaving without supplies. "Wait," a voice called out from the boardwalk. They turned. Elspeth Crowley stood there. She was a tall woman in black widow's weeds, her face lined and severe, holding a basket of eggs. She was the town midwife and the schoolteacher, a woman who had birthed half the town and taught the other half to read. She was the only person in Red Rock who scared the sheriff. She walked up to them. She did not look at Caleb. She looked at Mara. "I was across the street," Elspeth said clearly. Her voice carried. "I saw through the window. I saw his hand in his vest before he reached for you. It was a sleight of hand, a cheap parlor trick." Mara looked at her, stunned. "You saw?" "I have eyes," Elspeth said, "and I know Tom Hale. He is a dog that bites when his master whistles." She reached into her basket and pulled out a small sack of coffee beans. She pressed it into Mara's hand. "It is not much," Elspeth said, "but it will get you through the week. Go home. Do not let them see you hang your head. You have done nothing wrong but exist in a place that hates wild things." "Thank you," Caleb said, his voice thick. "Watch your back." "Caleb," Elspeth murmured. Stepping closer, "Rourke is moving. This was not about a watch. It was a test, to see if you would break." The ride home was a funeral procession. The silence was not empty. It was filled with the echo of Hale's laughter and the memory of Henderson looking at the floor. When they got inside the cabin, Mara did not take off her coat. She stood in the center of the room, shivering. It wasn't the cold. It was the adrenaline crash, the humiliation vibrating in her bones. She dropped the sack of coffee on the table. It made a dull thud. "I have to leave," she said. Caleb was latching the door. He turned. "What?" "I have to go," she said. Her voice rose, cracking. She began to pace, her hands tearing at the buttons of her coat. "They will not stop. You saw them. The law belongs to them. They will plant something else, or they will come out here and find a reason to arrest me. I cannot go to jail. Caleb, I cannot be in a cage. I will die. She was unraveling. The stoic survivor was gone, replaced by a terrified woman who saw the walls closing in. Mara, Caleb said, moving toward her. No, she shouted, backing away. You do not understand. You think this is just a town feud? You think this is just a bad deputy? It is a trap. It is always a trap. I bring it with me. I am cursed. Caleb, I am poison to you. If I stay, they will destroy you to get to me. I have to run. She was hysterical, grabbing her reticule, looking for the door. Caleb caught her. He did not grab her arms. He wrapped his arms around her body, pinning her arms to her sides, pulling her hard against his chest. It was a bear hug, a containment. Stop, he said into her hair. Stop running. She fought him. She kicked at his shins. She struggled. She sobbed. Let me go. They will take me. Let me go. I will not, Caleb said. He held her tight, absorbing her panic, letting her thrash against his solidity. I am not letting you go. You are my wife. You are home. She fought until her strength gave out. The fight drained out of her, leaving her limp in his arms, weeping uncontrollably. She slid down, and he went with her, kneeling on the floorboards in the pool of lantern light. She pulled back, looking at him. Her face was streaked with tears, red and swollen. They said I was a thief, she choked out. They looked at me like I was dirt. Do you believe them, Caleb? Do you look at me and see a thief? Caleb took her face in his hands. His thumbs wiped away the tears. His eyes were dark, steady, and absolutely clear. I see a woman who has survived hell, he said. I see a woman who works until her hands bleed. I see a woman who saves my life in a storm. He leaned his forehead against hers. I believe you. Mara, I do not care what they say. I do not care what they plant. I believe you. The words hit her harder than a physical blow. In her life, truth had always been what men with power decided it was. To be believed, simply, quietly, without condition, was a foreign language. She let out a ragged breath. Caleb! The distance between them vanished. It wasn't a decision. It was a collapse. She surged forward, and he met her. The kiss was desperate. It tasted of salt tears and desperation. It was a claiming. Caleb's hands moved from her face to her back, pulling her closer, trying to fuse her broken pieces together with his own strength. Mara gripped his shirt, pulling him down, needing the weight of him to anchor her to the earth. For a moment, the world outside, the snow, the wolves, the deputy, ceased to exist. There was only the heat of their bodies and the frantic, clumsy language of desire. Caleb shifted, pressing her back toward the floor, his body covering hers, shielding her. Then he stopped. He pulled back, his breathing harsh. His eyes were black with want, but his hands stilled on her waist. Mara looked up at him, her lips swollen, her eyes asking a question. Not like this, Caleb rasped. Not because you are scared. Not because you want to forget. He smoothed the hair back from her forehead. His touch was trembling, but gentle. When we are together, Mara, it will be because you chose it, not because you are running from something else. I will not be another thing that happened to you. I want to be the thing you choose. Mara stared at him. The respect in his eyes was terrifying. It demanded more from her than submission. It demanded her whole self. She reached up and touched his scar. I am not running from you, she whispered. I know, Caleb said. He kissed her forehead, a lingering seal of protection. But we have a fight to finish first. He helped her up. They sat at the table, the adrenaline fading into a weary resolve. Tell me, Caleb said. Tell me what you are really afraid of. It is not just the jail cell. Mara looked at the fire. She pulled the locket from her dress. She opened it. Inside was not a picture, but a tiny, folded scrap of paper. I told you I ran from a man, she said. His name is not important, but he worked for men like Rourke. He ran a dance hall in the camps, but it was not just dancing. She took a breath. I signed a paper. I was starving. I was 16. I signed a contract for domestic service. I thought it meant cleaning. It meant I belonged to the house. For 5 years, I ran after 2. She looked at Caleb. If they find that paper, if they connect Mara Quinn to the name I used then, the law says I am in breach of contract. They can drag me back, legally. They can make me work off the debt, and the debt never ends. Caleb, they add interest for every day you are gone. Caleb felt the blood drain from his face. It was not just bullying. It was slavery with a seal of approval. That is why Hale is pushing, Caleb said. Rourke buys debts. He buys contracts. If he finds out who you are, he owns me, Mara finished. That is why I have to run. I would rather freeze in the past than go back to that room. You are not going back, Caleb said. His voice was iron. We are going to fight this, but we cannot fight it with guns. We need proof that the contracts are illegal. We need a judge who isn't bought. 2 days later, the Hope arrived in a basket of knitting. Elspeth Crowley rode out to the ranch on her old mare. She claimed she was checking on a neighbor's baby, but she stopped at the Mercer gate. Mara invited her in. Elspeth sat by the fire, unwrapping a bundle of yarn. Deep inside the ball of gray wool was a folded piece of paper. I used to teach the children of the county clerk, Elspeth said, keeping her voice low. Before he died, I helped organize his papers. I saw things. Rourke has a ledger. He keeps it in the safe at the land office, where his nephew works. She pushed the paper across the table. It was a list of names, dates, and sums of money next to transport fees. He brings women in, Elspeth said. From the east, from the camps. He pays their way, then charges them double. He holds their papers until they pay it off. They never pay it off. Hale enforces the collections. Mara scanned the list. Her finger stopped at a line. Transport, Denver to Red Rock, 7 women, contract labor. This is it, Mara said. This is the scheme. If we can get that ledger. It is a federal crime, Caleb said. Peonage. It was outlawed. If we can get this to a U.S. Marshal. There is a marshal in Helena, Elspeth said. Marshal Davis. He is a hard man, but he hates Rourke. He tried to pin a cattle theft on him years ago. Helena is a 4-day ride, Caleb said. Through the snow. Better than a life in a cage, Mara said. Her eyes were bright now. She had a target. She wasn't the prey anymore. She was the hunter. We need the ledger, Caleb said. We cannot go to Helena with stories. We need the book. The nephew drinks, Elspeth said dryly. And he leaves the office unlocked when he visits the saloon on Friday nights. It was a plan. A desperate, dangerous plan. But it was a chance. They spent the evening mapping the route to Helena, counting their ammunition, preparing for a siege. For the first time, Mara slept soundly, her head on Caleb's shoulder, her hand resting on his chest. The next morning, the illusion of time was shattered. They were in the barn, graining the horses, when the dogs started barking. Not the warning bark for wolves, but the deep, aggressive bark for intruders. Caleb grabbed his rifle. He stepped out of the barn, Mara close behind him with the shotgun. A single rider sat in the yard. It was not Hale. It was a man in a long duster coat, his face obscured by a scarf. He sat a magnificent black stallion that looked too expensive for a working cowboy. The man did not draw a weapon. He held up a gloved hand. Mr. Mercer, the man said. His voice was cultured, smooth, and utterly terrifying. Mrs. Mercer, who are you? Caleb demanded, raising the rifle. I am a messenger, the man said. From Mr. Rourke. He sends his regards. The man reached into his coat. Caleb tensed, finger on the trigger. But the man pulled out a piece of paper, a yellowed, folded document. He tossed it onto the snow. Mr. Rourke has come into possession of an interesting contract, the man said. It seems he purchased the assets of a defunct mining operation in the Dakotas, including their outstanding labor debts. Mara made a small, strangled sound. He recognized the description. The writer said, a striking woman. Hard to forget. The writer smiled beneath his scarf. Mr. Rourke is a reasonable man. He wants what is his. He invites Mrs. Mercer to come to town tomorrow to discuss the terms of her repayment. He feels she could work off the debt at his ranch. He has a large house. He needs staff. She is not going anywhere, Caleb said. If she does not come, the writer continued, as if Caleb had not spoken, then Mr. Rourke will be forced to seek compensation elsewhere. He understands you have a fine herd of cattle, Mr. Mercer, and a barn that looks quite flammable in this dry winter air. And accidents. Well, they happen so frequently out here. The rider gathered his reins. The horse danced, kicking up snow. Noon tomorrow, Mrs. Mercer, the rider said, or we burn you out. The choice is yours. He wheeled the horse and galloped away, disappearing over the ridge into the blinding white of the coming storm. Caleb and Mara stood in the silence. The paper lay on the snow between them, a yellow stain on the white. Caleb looked at Mara. Her face was pale, but her eyes were dry. She shifted the shotgun in her hands. She pumped the action. The sound, clack, clack, echoed like a gavel drop. We are not running, she said. No, Caleb said. He looked at the smoke trail of the rider. We are not running. The ranch was no longer a home. It was a fortress built of logs and silence. For 3 days. Caleb and Mara did not sleep at the same time. They moved through the hours in a grim rotation of watchfulness and labor. The snow had stopped falling, but the wind had scoured the drifts into hard, frozen waves that looked like a petrified ocean. The temperature hovered far below freezing, a cold so absolute it seemed to snap the air like a dry twig. They prepared for a siege. It was a methodical dismantling of comfort in exchange for survival. Caleb moved the bulk of the winter stores, the sacks of flour, the dried venison, the precious coffee, out of the cabin. He pried up the floorboards in the tack room of the barn and cached the food there, wrapping it in oilcloth to keep the damp out. If Rourke's men burned the cabin, they would not starve. Mara took charge of the horses. They led the animals out of the main corral, which was too visible from the ridge, and picketed them in a deep, blind coulee a quarter-mile behind the house. The coulee was choked with scrub oak and shadowed by a limestone overhang, a natural hide that broke the wind and hid the steam of the horse's breath. It is not enough to hide them, Mara said, rubbing soot over the white star on the mare's forehead. We have to make them look like they are gone, driven off. She worked with a terrifying efficiency. She brushed out their hoofprints with a pine bough as they walked back to the cabin. She was reading the land not as scenery, but as a chessboard where a single mistake meant checkmate. Rourke did not attack directly. He was a man who understood that fear was a more effective weapon than fire, and he let the silence stretch until it hummed. Then he began to pluck at the strings. On the 4th morning, Caleb found the north fence line cut. It was not a simple break. 100 yards of barbed wire had been snipped into useless ribbons, the posts sawed through at the base. 20 head of cattle had been scattered into the Badlands, driven off by men who knew how to move quiet and fast. The next day, a small fire was set near the barn. It had not spread, likely doused by a shift in the wind. But the scorched black circle in the snow was a signature. In the center of the burn mark, someone had left a woman's hair comb. It was cheap, tortoiseshell, and broken in half. Caleb stood over the blackened snow, his hands shaking. It was not fear. It was a rage so pure and white-hot it nearly blinded him. He felt the old rhythm in his blood, the pulse of the fighter he had buried in Abilene. He wanted to saddle the roan. He wanted to ride into town, walk into the saloon or the land office, and beat Silas Rourke until the man could not stand. He turned toward the house, his boots crunching violently on the ice. He reached for his Winchester leaning against the porch rail. No! Mara was there. She stood in the doorway, wrapped in the heavy canvas coat, her face pale but her eyes steady. Get out of my way. Mara, Caleb said. His voice was a stranger's voice, low and grinding. They are mocking us. They are leaving tokens like we are children to be frightened. I'm going to finish it. You will ride into town, Mara said, not moving. You will kill one of them, maybe two, and then the sheriff will shoot you down in the street like a mad dog, and Rourke will win. I do not care about winning, Caleb roared, the control finally snapping. He slammed his hand against the porch post. I care about them threatening you. I care that I cannot walk out my own door without wondering if a rifle is trained on my chest. I promised to keep you safe, and I am failing because I am trying to be a good man. A good man does not survive this. Mara, a hard man does. A dead man does not protect anyone, she snapped back. She stepped off the porch, walking into the snow in her thin boots. She grabbed the barrel of the rifle he was holding. She did not pull it away. She just held it, forcing him to look at her. Do you think I have not wanted to kill them? She asked. Her voice dropped, fierce and trembling. Do you think I do not wake up wanting to burn their world down? But that is the trap. Caleb, Rourke expects rage. He expects you to lose your mind. He knows how to handle a man with a gun. He owns the law that will hang you for using it. Caleb looked down at her. The wind whipped her dark hair across her face. Then what do we do? He asked, the fight draining out of him, leaving only a hollow ache. We just wait for them to burn us out? We beat them with the one thing they do not think we have, Mara said. Patience and proof. We play the game until we can flip the board. They spent that afternoon repairing the roof where the wind had torn a shingle loose near the chimney. It was bitter work, the wind numbing their fingers, but it needed to be done. They sat on the ridge of the roof, taking a break, looking out over the valley. The sun was setting, casting long, bruised shadows across the snow. I had a friend, Mara said quietly. She did not look at him. She looked at the horizon. In the first camp, her name was Sarah. She was younger than me, soft. She still believed that if you cried, someone would help you. Caleb watched her profile. He saw the way her throat worked as she swallowed. She trusted a man who promised to take her east, Mara continued. He said he had a ticket for her. He took her to a room to give it to her. I told her not to go. I told her his eyes were lying. She went anyway. Mara rubbed her thumb over the knuckle of her glove. I waited for her all night. She never came back. When I asked about her the next day, the man laughed. He said she had moved on, but I saw her shawl in the mud by the river. They break the soft ones. Caleb, that is why I stopped crying. That is why I learned to read a man's hands before I look at his face. If you are soft, you die. Or worse, you survive as something broken. You are not broken, Caleb said. I am cracked, she said. I am held together by spit and wire. You are held together by iron, Caleb said. He reached out and touched her face. His hand was rough, calloused, but his touch was light as a feather. And you are not alone anymore. You do not have to watch the door by yourself. Mara closed her eyes. She leaned into his palm. It was a surrender. For a woman who treated every touch as a potential threat, this was an act of supreme courage. She let out a long, shuddering breath, the tension of the last week melting for a second under the warmth of his hand. Sarah would have liked you, she whispered. I would have liked to save her, Caleb said, but I will save you. That night, the cabin felt smaller, warmer. The siege outside had created a strange, pressurized intimacy inside. They were the only two people on Earth. They washed at the basin in the corner. The fire was low. Caleb had stripped off his shirt to wash the day's grime from his chest and arms. He stood by the stove, drying himself with a rough towel. Mara was watching him. She was standing by the table, braiding her hair for the night. Her eyes tracked the movement of his muscles, the scars on his back, the solid, unwavering strength of him. She stopped braiding. She walked over to the basin. She stood close to him, closer than she usually allowed. The smell of lye soap and wood smoke hung in the air between them. Caleb went still. He lowered the towel. He did not move away, but he did not advance. He let her set the distance. Mara reached out. Her hand trembled slightly, then steadied. She placed her palm flat against the center of his chest, over his heart. She could feel the heavy, rhythmic thud of it beneath the skin. "You are warm," she said. "I am burning up," Caleb murmured. His voice was rough. Mara looked up into his eyes. She saw the desire there, dark and heavy, but she also saw the restraint. He would stand there until he turned to stone rather than cross a line she had not drawn. She stepped closer. Her knees brushed his. She reached up and unbuttoned the top button of her dress. Then the second. "Mara," Caleb breathed. "You do not have to—" "I know," she interrupted. "That is why I am doing it." "Because I choose to—" "I am not running tonight. Caleb, I am staying." She took his hand and placed it on her waist. She stepped into him, closing the last inch of distance. He made a sound low in his throat, a groan of relief and hunger. He wrapped his arms around her, pulling her against him, burying his face in the crook of her neck. He smelled of hard work and pine and safety. They moved toward the bed in the corner, not with the frantic desperation of their earlier kiss, but with a slow, deliberate reverence. When they lay down, the world outside, Rourke, the wolves, the cold, ceased to exist. There was only the heat of skin, the murmur of consent, and the profound relief of being held by someone who would kill to keep you safe, yet touched you as if you were made of holy glass. Morning brought the world back with a vengeance. The sun was barely up when a rider appeared on the ridge. It was not Rourke's man. It was Elspeth Crowley, her horse laboring through the drifts. She practically fell out of the saddle when she reached the yard. Caleb caught her. Her face was gray with exhaustion and fear. "You have to move," Elspeth gasped. "Today, now." "Come inside," Mara said, pulling her toward the warmth. Inside, Elspeth drank coffee with shaking hands. "They came to my house last night, Hale and 2 others. They tore up my books. They broke my jars. They told me that if I continued to conspire with criminals, I would be unfit to teach the children. They said accidents happen to widows who talk too much." She looked at Caleb. "But that is not the worst of it. I heard them talking. The warrant is signed, Judge Taggart. He is Rourke's creature. He signed it yesterday. They are coming for Mara tomorrow morning, not to question her, to take her to the county lockup for contract fraud and theft. Once she is in that cell, she never comes out," Caleb finished. "We have to go to Helena," Mara said. "We have to find Marshall Davis." "You cannot go without proof," Elspeth said. "Stories will not work against a warrant signed by a judge." "The ledger," Caleb said. "You said the nephew leaves the office unlocked." "Tonight is Friday," Elspeth said. "He will be at the Golden Steer Saloon by sundown. He stays until he cannot walk. The land office will be empty." It was a terrifying gamble. To get the proof, they had to go into the heart of the enemy's territory. "We go tonight," Caleb said. "We get the book, then we ride north, cross the river at Miller's Ford, and cut through the timber to the rail stop at Silver Creek. We can catch the morning train to Helena." "The ford is dangerous in this ice," Mara said. "It is the only way to bypass the patrols on the main road," Caleb said. "We have no choice." They left the ranch at dusk. They did not look back. They took only the horses, their weapons, and the clothes on their backs. Red Rock was loud on a Friday night. Music and laughter spilled from the saloon, yellow light pooling on the snow. Caleb and Mara tethered their horses in the alley behind the livery, in the deep shadows. "Stay with the horses," Caleb whispered. "No," Mara said. "I know locks, and I can read a ledger faster than you." "We go together." They moved through the shadows like ghosts. The land office was a small brick building on the corner. The front was dark. They went to the back door. Mara tried the handle. Locked. She pulled a hairpin from her braid. She worked it into the mechanism. Her ear pressed to the wood. She twisted, probed, and waited. Click. She pushed the door open. They slipped inside. The office smelled of stale cigar smoke and ink. The safe was in the corner. It was a heavy iron box. But, as Elspeth had predicted, the door was not fully spun shut. The nephew was careless. Mara pulled it open. Inside were stacks of deeds and a thick, leather-bound book. She opened the book to the recent entries. She scanned the pages in the moonlight filtering through the window. "Here," she whispered, her fingers shaking. "November, transport fees, deductions. And here, a payment to Sheriff Miller for processing. It is all here." She tucked the heavy book into her coat. "Let's go," Caleb hissed. They were halfway to the door when the front handle rattled. They froze. "I forgot my tobacco," a voice slurred. It was the nephew. The key turned in the front lock. "Window," Caleb whispered. He shoved the sash of the back window up. It groaned in the frame. The front door opened. "Who's there?" the nephew shouted, fumbling for a lantern. "Go!" Caleb boosted Mara through the window. She landed in the snow of the alley. Caleb vaulted after her just as a gunshot blew out the glass above his head. "Thieves!" the nephew screamed. "Thieves! At the office!" The town erupted. Men poured out of the saloon. Caleb and Mara sprinted for the horses. They hit the saddles just as Deputy Hale came running around the corner, pistol drawn. "Stop them!" Hale shouted. He fired wildly. A bullet tore a splinter from the livery wall near Mara's head. They spurred the horses, tearing out of the alley and into the open street. They galloped past the mercantile, past the church, their horses' hooves throwing up clods of frozen mud. "Ride!" Caleb roared. They hit the open prairie, the lights of Red Rock fading behind them. But the pursuit was instant. A posse was forming. Rourke's men were always ready. The chase was a nightmare of wind and ice. They rode hard to the north, pushing the horses to their limit. The wind bit through their coats, numbing their faces until they could not speak. Behind them, torches flickered in the distance like angry fireflies. The posse was tracking them. "The river!" Mara shouted, pointing. The dark ribbon of the river cut across their path. It was not frozen solid. The current was too fast. It was a churning slurry of black water and jagged ice flows. "We have to cross!" Caleb yelled. "They will cut us off at the bridge." They drove the horses into the water. The shock of the cold was instant and paralyzing. The horses screamed, thrashing against the current. The water rose to the saddle skirts. Ice battered against Caleb's legs, bruising bone. Mara's horse stumbled. She clung to the horn, the heavy ledger weighing her down. "Keep moving!" Caleb shouted, grabbing her rein. "Do not let him stop!" They scrambled up the far bank, shivering violently, their clothes instantly freezing into stiff armor. The horses were blowing hard, steam rising from their wet coats. They rode into the timber, the pine trees offering a brief respite from the wind. They could see the torches of the posse on the other side of the river. The pursuers had stopped at the water, wary of the ice. They would have to go around to the bridge, costing them an hour. "We have time," Caleb wheezed. But not much. They rode through the night. The landscape was brutal, steep ravines, hidden drops, snow that hid treachery. By the time the sky began to lighten to a bruised purple in the east, the horses were stumbling. They reached the outskirts of Silver Creek. It was bigger than Red Rock, a rail town with a depot and a telegraph line. The train to Helena was due at 8 o'clock. They reined in at the top of a rise overlooking the town. "We made it," Mara whispered. She touched the ledger inside her coat. Caleb was looking back the way they had come. He saw them, riders, not the main posse, but a scout group, 3 men on fresh horses, cutting across the ridge. They were flanking them. They would reach the depot at the same time as Caleb and Mara. And there were more dust clouds to the east. Rourke had telegraphed ahead. He had men waiting. Caleb looked at the depot. It was a mile away. Then he looked at the narrow canyon trail that led down to it. "They are going to bottle us up," Caleb said. "If we ride down there together, they will pin us against the train tracks. They will shoot us before we get near the platform." Mara looked at him, fear dawning in her eyes. "So we fight. We have the rifles." "We cannot win a fight against 10 men, Caleb said. "Not with you carrying the book." He turned his horse to face her. His face was battered by the wind, his eyes dark and calm. "Give me your hat," he said. "What?" "Give me your hat and your coat," Caleb said. "Put on my duster. Take the ledger. Ride down the old creek bed to the water tower. Wait for the train to whistle. Do not get on until it is moving." "No," Mara said. She realized what he was doing. "No, Caleb, I am not leaving you." "They are looking for a man and a woman," Caleb said. "If I ride out along the ridge, making noise, they will follow me. They will think I am trying to draw them off. They will think I have the book." "They will kill you!" Mara cried, grabbing his arm. "They will try," Caleb said. "But I am hard to kill. And if they catch me, I am just a husband protecting his wife. I have no evidence on me. They can beat me, but they cannot hang me without the book." "I cannot do this alone," she sobbed. "You have to," Caleb said. He leaned over and kissed her. It was a fierce, burning kiss, tasting of goodbyes. "You are the only one who can do it. Mara, you know the story. You have the voice. You take that book to Marshall Davis. You tell him everything, and you come back for me." "I swear it," she whispered. "Go," Caleb said. "Ride." He stripped off his duster and threw it to her. He took her hat and jammed it on his head. He wheeled the roan around. "Hey!" Caleb shouted at the approaching riders, firing a shot into the air. "Over here, you sons of bitches! Come and get it!" He spurred his horse and galloped away from the town, riding silhouetted against the skyline. A perfect target. The riders turned. They took the bait. They spurred after him, yelling, firing their pistols. Mara watched him go. Her heart was tearing in half. She wanted to scream. She wanted to chase him, but she felt the weight of the ledger against her ribs, the names of the women, the dead friend, the future. She gritted her teeth. She pulled Caleb's heavy duster around her, shrinking into its warmth. She turned her exhausted mare toward the creek bed and the waiting train. She rode down into the shadows, alone, while the sound of gunfire echoed on the ridge behind her. The rhythm of the train wheels against the iron rails was a physical assault. Clack-clack, clack-clack, to Mara Mercer, huddled in the corner of the third-class car. It sounded like the ticking of a clock counting down the seconds of her life. She was alone. The sensation was more biting than the draft leaking through the window frame. For the last month, Caleb had been a physical wall between her and the world. His shoulder against hers at the table, his breathing in the dark, his large, scarred hand covering hers on the fence rail. Without him, the old terror, the cold, creeping panic of the prey animal, began to circle in the back of her mind. She pulled Caleb's duster tighter around herself. It smelled of him, pine pitch, horses, and the faint, metallic tang of gun oil. She buried her nose in the collar, inhaling the scent like it was smelling salts. "Focus," she told herself. "You are not running away. You are running toward—" She pressed her hand against her ribs, feeling the hard rectangular shape of the ledger hidden beneath her bodice. That book was not just paper and ink. It was a weapon. It was the key to the cage. The train hissed into the station at Helena in a cloud of sulphurous steam. The city was a shock after the silence of the high plains. It was a brawl of brick buildings, shouting draymen, and streets churned into black slurry by 1,000 carriage wheels. Mara moved through the crowd with her head down, her hat pulled low. She knew how to disappear in a crowd. It was a skill she had learned in the mining camps. Walk with purpose, but not haste. Look at no one, but see everything. She found the office of the United States Marshal 2 streets over from the territorial courthouse. It was a sturdy stone building with iron bars on the windows. Inside, the air was stale and warm. A man sat behind a desk piled high with wanted posters and correspondence. Marshall Davis was a man carved from granite, with a mustache the color of steel wool and eyes that had seen every variety of human sin. He looked up as Mara entered. He did not smile. "Help you, ma'am?" Mara approached the desk. Her hands were trembling, but she forced them to unbutton her coat. She reached in and pulled out the ledger. She slammed it onto the desk. The sound echoed in the quiet room. "My name is Mara Mercer," she said. Her voice was raspy from the cold ride, but it did not waver. "I am the wife of Caleb Mercer, of Red Rock, and this book proves that Silas Rourke is running a slave trade under the guise of contract labor." Davis looked at the book. Then he looked at her. He saw the bruises of exhaustion under her eyes, the windburn on her cheeks, and the desperate, ferocious set of her jaw. "That is a heavy accusation. Mrs. Mercer," Davis rumbled. "Read the transport column for November," Mara said, "and the payments to Sheriff Miller." Davis opened the book. He adjusted his spectacles. The room was silent, save for the crackle of the stove. As he read, his expression did not change, but the lines around his mouth deepened. He turned a page, then another. He looked up. "Where is your husband?" "He stayed behind," Mara said. Her voice cracked. "Just once. He drew them off so I could get this to you. If he is not dead, he is in their hands." Davis closed the book. He stood up, towering over the desk. "Sit down. Mrs. Mercer," he said. "I am going to pour you a whiskey, and then you are going to tell me everything. Start from the beginning." In the jail cell in Red Rock, time had lost its meaning. Caleb sat on the cot, his back against the damp stone wall. His hands were cuffed in front of him. His face was a map of fresh violence. One eye was swollen shut, purple and angry. His lip was split. His ribs burned with every breath, a sharp reminder of the rifle butt Deputy Hale had used to subdue him after the chase. They had caught him 5 miles out of town. He had led them on a merry chase, riding the ridge lines, firing into the air, making sure every eye was on him while Mara slipped into the dark. When they finally cornered him in a box canyon, he had dropped his rifle and raised his hands. He had expected them to kill him then, but Hale had ridden up, breathless and grinning. "Alive," Hale had ordered the men. "Rourke wants to ask him where the book is." Now, the heavy iron door of the cell block clanged open. Hale walked in. He was fresh, shaved, and smelled of coffee. He pulled a wooden chair up to the bars and sat down, leaning his arms on the backrest. "Morning, Caleb," Hale said brightly. "How are the ribs?" Caleb looked at him through his good eye. He did not speak. He was stone. He was the mountain. He focused his mind on the image of Mara riding the train. "She is safe," he thought. "Every minute I sit here is a minute she gets closer to Helena." "You know," Hale said, picking at a fingernail, "Mr. Rourke is losing patience. He is a businessman. He hates loose ends, and that wife of yours is a very loose end." "She is gone," Caleb rasped. The words tasted like blood. "We know she is gone," Hale said. "But she will come back. They always come back. Women like that. They are sentimental. Or they are stupid. She will try to trade the book for you." Hale stood up. He walked to the bars and gripped them. His face changed, the smile vanishing to reveal the cruelty beneath. "Tell me where she was heading. Caleb, was it Silver Creek? Did she take the train?" Caleb remained silent. Hale sighed. He unlocked the cell door. He stepped inside. He unholstered his revolver, holding it by the barrel, using the heavy grip as a club. "I need you to fight back." "Caleb," Hale whispered. "Please, just take a swing at me. Give me a reason to put a bullet in your gut and tell the sheriff you tried to escape. It would be so much cleaner." Caleb looked at the gun. The temptation was a physical heat in his blood. He could take him, even hurt, even cuffed. Caleb knew he could snap Hale's wrist and drive the man's own weapon into his teeth. The violence he had buried in Abilene was scratching at the coffin lid, screaming to be let out. But if he fought, he died. And if he died, Mara was alone. Caleb looked up at Hale. He forced his muscles to relax. He slumped his shoulders. "I am tired. Tom," Caleb said quietly. "I am just a farmer. I do not want to fight you." Disappointment flashed in Hale's eyes. He struck Caleb across the face with the pistol grip. It was a vicious, backhanded blow that snapped Caleb's head to the side. Caleb tasted fresh blood. He did not raise his hands. He did not make a sound. "Boring," Hale spat. He holstered the gun. "Enjoy the dark. Mercer, we will try again tonight." The legal machinery of the territory ground slow, but the ledger was the grease that made it move. Marshal Davis took Mara to see Judge Ambrose, a federal circuit judge who held court in the back of a dry goods store while the new courthouse was being built. Ambrose was a young man with ambition and a distinct lack of fear regarding local cattle barons. However, Rourke had friends everywhere. By the time Davis had sworn out the affidavit, a lawyer representing Mr. Silas Rourke's business interests had arrived by the morning train. The preliminary hearing was held 2 days later. The room was crowded. Word had spread that a woman was challenging the king of Red Rock. Mara sat at the plaintiff's table next to Marshal Davis. She wore a clean dress the marshal's wife had lent her. It was gray wool, severe and simple. She wore no hat. She wanted them to see her face. Rourke's lawyer was a man named Sterling, dressed in a suit that cost more than Caleb's farm. He paced before the judge, his thumbs hooked in his vest. "Your Honor," Sterling boomed. "This is a farce. We have here a woman of questionable virtue, a woman who admits to fleeing a lawful contract in the Dakota Territory, a woman who is currently wanted by the sheriff of Red Rock for theft." He turned and pointed a finger at Mara. "She has stolen private business records." Sterling continued, "And now she weaves a fantastical tale of slavery to cover her own crimes. She is a runaway. Your Honor, she is a dance hall girl who trapped a lonely rancher into marriage and is now trying to extort a respected community leader." The murmurs in the room were low and ugly. Dance hall girl, immoral, used goods. The words hung in the air like smoke. Mara felt the shame trying to rise, hot and suffocating. It was the old weapon. They used her past to silence her future. They wanted her to look down. They wanted her to cry. Marshal Davis stood up. "Your Honor, the ledger speaks for itself, but Mrs. Mercer can speak to the context." "Mrs. Mercer," the judge said, looking over his spectacles. "Stand up." Mara stood. Her knees shook, but she locked them. She looked at Sterling, then at the judge. "Did you sign a contract with the mining company?" Sterling asked, smirking. "I signed a paper," Mara said. Her voice was not loud, but it carried to the back of the room. "I was 16 years old. I was starving. The man told me I would be washing sheets. He did not tell me I would be locked in a room. He did not tell me that my wages would be docked for the air I breathed until I owed more than I could ever earn." "But you signed it," Sterling pressed. "You chose that life." "I chose to survive," Mara said. She turned to face the room. She looked at the faces of the strangers, shopkeepers, wives, drifters. "You call it a choice," she said. "But when a trap snaps shut on a wolf's leg, does the wolf choose to chew off its own foot to get free, or does it just want to live?" The room went quiet. "I am not a ledger entry," Mara said. "I am not a debt to be collected. I am a woman. I have a name. I have a husband who is bleeding in a cell right now because he believes I am a person, not property, Mr. Rourke thinks he can own people because he has money, but the law is supposed to be the one place where money does not count." She looked at the judge. "I am not asking for pity. I am asking for the right to walk out my own door without looking over my shoulder. Is that not what this country is for?" Judge Ambrose stared at her for a long moment. He looked at the ledger open on his bench. He looked at Sterling, who had lost his smirk. "Marshal Davis," the judge said, "this ledger provides probable cause for a federal investigation into peonage and kidnapping. I am issuing a warrant for the arrest of Silas Rourke and his associates, and I am authorizing you to deputize a posse to execute it." He banged his gavel. "And Mr. Sterling, if you interrupt me again, I will hold you in contempt." The return to Red Rock was not a victory parade. It was an invasion. Marshal Davis did not waste time. He gathered 6 men, hard-bitten deputies who rode for the federal wage. They loaded their saddlebags with ammunition. The sky had turned a bruising purple, threatening snow. They rode hard. Mara rode with them. Davis had tried to leave her in Helena, but she had looked him in the eye and said, "He is my husband. If you leave me, I will walk." He had given her a horse. They reached Red Rock at dawn on the second day. The town was waking up to a gray, freezing morning. The marshal rode straight to the jailhouse. He kicked the door open. Sheriff Miller was sleeping at his desk. He woke with a start to find a Winchester pointed at his nose. "United States Marshal," Davis barked. "You are relieved of duty." Miller, get the keys. They found Caleb in the back cell. Mara made a sound that was half sob, half scream when she saw him. He was lying on the cot, his shirt stained with dried blood. His face was swollen, his eyes glazed with pain and dehydration. "Open it," Davis ordered Miller. The sheriff fumbled with the keys. The moment the lock clicked, Mara was inside. Caleb tried to sit up. He groaned, clutching his ribs. "Mara," he croaked. He sounded like his throat was full of gravel. "I am here," she wept, falling to her knees beside the cot. She did not care about the blood or the filth. She wrapped her arms around his neck, burying her face in his shoulder. Caleb's good eye found her face. He raised a shaking hand to touch her hair. You did it?" "We have the warrants," she whispered. "Davis is here. We have the posse." He let out a breath that was a shuddering release of days of tension. He leaned his forehead against hers. His skin was hot, feverish. "I knew," he whispered. "I knew you would come back." They stayed like that for a moment, forehead to forehead, hands gripping tight. It was not a soft reunion. It was desperate. It was the clinch of two boxers who had gone 12 rounds and were holding each other up. The desire that surged between them was fierce, threaded with the anger of what had been done to them. "Can you ride?" Davis asked from the doorway. His voice was gentle, but urgent. Caleb looked up. He set his jaw. "Give me a horse," he said. "I can ride." They moved him to the livery stable to get him water and clean his wounds. Mara washed the dried blood from his face. She touched the purple bruising on his ribs with trembling fingers. "Hale did this," she said. Her voice was cold. "He wanted me to break," Caleb said. He took her hand and kissed the palm. He lost, but the war was not over. As they were saddling fresh horses, a boy ran into the stable. It was the son of the blacksmith. "Fire!" the boy yelled. "Fire at the Mercer place!" Caleb froze. He looked at Mara. "Rourke," Caleb said. "He knows the marshal is here. He is burning the evidence, or he is drawing us out." "It is a trap," Mara said. "Just like the fire in the barn." "We have to go," Caleb said. "The cattle, the house." "Let it burn," Mara said. "We have the warrants." "No," Caleb said. "He is not just burning the house. He is waiting for us. If we do not go, he will come here. He will turn the town into a shooting gallery." Marshal Davis checked the load in his shotgun. "Then we go to him, but we go on our terms." The landscape between the town and the ranch had turned into a nightmare of mud and ice. The horses struggled for footing. The wind whipped the snow into blinding sheets. They saw the smoke before they saw the fire, a black pillar rising against the gray sky. When they crested the ridge overlooking the ranch, the devastation was clear. The barn was fully engulfed, flames roaring against the wind. The cabin was smoking, the roof catching fire, and there were men waiting. Silas Rourke had not run. He had dug in. His men were positioned behind the water trough, behind the stone wall of the root cellar, and in the stand of cottonwoods. "Federal Marshal!" Davis roared, his voice booming over the wind. "Throw down your weapons. I have a warrant for Silas Rourke." The answer was a rifle shot that kicked up snow inches from Davis's horse. "Take cover," Davis yelled. The firefight erupted. It was chaotic and brutal. The wind tore the smoke apart, making it hard to see. Horses screamed and scattered. Caleb and Mara bailed off their horses and scrambled for the cover of a rocky outcrop. Caleb had a rifle now, and despite his injuries, his hands were steady. He fired, working the lever action with a grim rhythm. "Stay down," Caleb shouted at Mara as a bullet chipped the rock near her head. "I can shoot," she yelled back, leveling her own rifle. The federal deputies were flanking Rourke's men. The discipline of the marshal's posse was turning the tide. Rourke's hired guns were mercenaries. They were not willing to die for a paycheck against federal badges. One by one, they broke cover and ran for the Badlands. "They are running!" Davis shouted. "Push forward!" But Rourke was not running, and neither was Hale. In the confusion of the smoke and the advancing line, Mara saw movement near the burning barn. She saw Rourke's black stallion, and she saw Hale. Hale was not firing at the deputies. He was moving low, circling the flank. He was coming for the rocks where Caleb and Mara were pinned. Caleb was reloading. He was focused on the cottonwoods where Rourke was shouting orders. "Caleb!" Mara screamed. Hale surged out of the smoke like a demon. He didn't go for Caleb. He went for the leverage. He lunged at Mara. She tried to bring her rifle around, but he was too close. He knocked the barrel aside and grabbed her by the hair, wrenching her backward. She screamed, clawing at his face. Hale jammed the barrel of his revolver against her temple. He dragged her out into the open, using her body as a shield. "Hold your fire!" Hale screamed. "Hold it or I blow her brains out!" The shooting stopped. The silence that followed was heavy with the roar of the fire. Caleb spun around. The color drained from his face. He froze, his rifle half raised. He saw Hale's wild eyes. He saw the gun pressed against Mara's skin. He saw Mara's eyes, terrified, but locked on his. "Drop it, Mercer!" Hale shouted. "Drop the gun!" Marshal Davis and his men held their positions, weapons trained but unable to shoot. Hale had her tight. "Back off!" Hale yelled. "We are leaving. I am taking her with me. Anyone follows, she dies." Rourke rode out from the cottonwoods, looking calm amidst the ruin. "A sound negotiation," Rourke called out. "Let us pass. Marshal, you can have the land. I will take the girl as collateral." Caleb stood in the snow. His chest was heaving. His ribs screamed with pain. He looked at Hale. He saw the finger whitening on the trigger. He looked at Mara. She was not struggling anymore. She knew that if she moved, she died. The choice, it hung in the air, sharper than the cold. If Caleb trusted the law, he would drop the gun. He would let them take her, hoping the marshal could track them, hoping to negotiate later. But he knew Hale. He knew Rourke. If they took her now, into the Badlands, he would never see her alive again. She would become another Sarah, another shawl in the mud. But if he shot, Hale was using her as a shield. The target was impossible. An inch to the left, and he killed his wife. An inch to the right, and he missed, and Hale pulled the trigger to take the shot. Caleb had to become the killer again. He had to summon the man from Abilene, the cold, dead-eyed machine that broke necks and didn't feel remorse. He had to let the violence swallow him whole. "Drop it!" Hale screamed again, dragging Mara backward toward a waiting horse. Caleb looked at Mara. She blinked. It was a tiny movement, a signal. "Do not let them take me." Caleb stopped shaking. His breathing slowed. The world narrowed down to a tunnel. The fire, the wind, the marshal. It all faded. There was only the front sight of his Winchester and the sliver of Tom Hale's face visible behind Mara's head. He raised the rifle. "No!" the marshal shouted. Caleb did not hear him. He was not a homesteader anymore. He was not a husband. He was a bullet. He squeezed the trigger. The rifle stock slammed against Caleb's shoulder, a brutal, familiar kick that reverberated through his bruised ribs. The sound of the shot cracked the frozen air, sharper than the roaring of the burning barn, through the smoke and the swirling snow. Caleb watched the result not with triumph, but with a cold, detached clarity. The bullet did not take Deputy Hale in the head. Caleb had shifted his aim in the fraction of a second before the hammer fell. The lead slug tore through Hale's right forearm. The one holding the revolver pressed to Mara's temple. Hale screamed, a high, thin sound that was swallowed by the wind. His hand spasmed, the gun flying from his grip and spinning into the snow. The impact spun him around, breaking his hold on Mara. "Run!" Caleb roared, working the lever of the Winchester. Mara did not need to be told. The moment the arm released her, she dropped to the ground, rolling into the depression of a frozen wagon rut just as the air above her head filled with lead. Rourke's men, seeing their deputy fall, opened fire from the tree line. The marshal's deputies returned it, a chaotic volley that chewed up the bark of the cottonwoods and sent snow spraying in white geysers. "Pull back!" Rourke shouted. His voice was not panicked. It was angry, the tone of a man whose property had misbehaved. "Get him on a horse. We are leaving." Caleb raised the rifle again, sighting on Rourke's broad back as the rancher wheeled his stallion. It would be an easy shot, a center-mass hit that would end the reign of the King of Red Rock in a heartbeat. The violence in Caleb's blood sang a dark, seductive song. "End it. Do it now." But he heard Mara's voice in his head. "We win with proof, not rage." If he shot Rourke in the back, the ledger became worthless. The narrative would shift. Rourke would die a martyr, a respected businessman murdered by a wild homesteader, and his network of debt and influence would simply pass to the next man in line. Caleb lowered the barrel. He watched as Rourke's men dragged a bleeding, cursing Hale onto a horse and galloped away into the gray curtain of the storm, heading not for the Badlands, but toward the main road that led to the Triple R Ranch. "They are running," Marshal Davis said, appearing beside Caleb. He kept his shotgun leveled. "They will hole up at the big house. It is a fortress." Caleb did not answer. He dropped the rifle into the snow and ran toward the rut where Mara lay. She was pushing herself up, her face streaked with soot and snow. She was shaking, but when Caleb fell to his knees and reached for her, her hands grabbed his coat with a grip that was shockingly strong. "I am whole," she gasped, seeing the terror in his eyes. "He did not shoot. You hit him." Caleb pulled her into him, crushing her against his chest. He buried his face in her hair, breathing in the smell of smoke and life. For a moment, the world narrowed down to the beat of her heart against his. "I almost," Caleb whispered, his voice cracking. "I almost lost the shot." "But you did not," Mara said fiercely. She pulled back, framing his bruised face with her frozen hands. "You did not miss, and you did not kill Rourke." "I wanted to," Caleb admitted. "I know," she said. "But now we finish it the right way." The Triple R Ranch was not just a home. It was a monument to Silas Rourke's vanity. The main house sat on a rise overlooking the valley, built of imported stone and timber, flanked by bunkhouses that held 30 men. It was 2 hours later when the marshal's posse, reinforced by the deputies from Helena and a grim-faced Caleb, crested the ridge. The storm had broken, leaving behind a sky of polished steel and a wind that cut like a razor. "He has men in the loft of the barn," Caleb said, scanning the layout, "and riflemen in the upper windows of the house. He thinks we will not storm it," Davis said. "He thinks his lawyers in Helena are already filing injunctions to stop me." "He does not know about the ledger," Mara said. She was riding Caleb's spare horse, wrapped in a blanket, her face set like flint. "He thinks I am just a thief he can intimidate. He does not know we have the names." "Stay here," Caleb told her. "No," Mara said. "I am the witness. I am the evidence. I am going to the door." They rode down the slope. It was a slow, deliberate procession. They stopped 50 yards from the porch. The front door of the great house opened. Silas Rourke stepped out. He held a glass of brandy in one hand. He was not dressed for a siege. He was dressed for a business meeting. His arrogance was a physical weight in the air. "Marshal Davis," Rourke called out, his voice smooth. "You are trespassing, and you are harboring a fugitive. I suggest you hand Mrs. Mercer over to the local authorities and ride back to Helena before you make a career-ending mistake." "I have a federal warrant for your arrest." "Rourke," Davis shouted. "For peonage, kidnapping, and conspiracy." Rourke laughed. It was a dry, dismissive sound, based on the word of a hysterical woman and a homesteader with a criminal record. "No judge will sign that paper." "Based on your own bookkeeping," Davis said. He pulled the ledger from his saddlebag and held it up. Rourke went still. The glass of brandy did not waver, but his knuckles turned white. "And witnesses," Caleb added. He guided his horse forward. "Elspeth Crowley has given a statement, and your nephew in town. He does not like jail. Silas, he talked for an hour about how you move the women, about the false debts." The curtains in the upper windows shifted. The riflemen were listening. These were hired hands, men who worked for wages. They knew what federal charges meant. They knew that loyalty to Rourke stopped where the hangman's noose began. "Lies," Rourke spat. "All of it. You have nothing." Then the front door opened again. Deputy Hale stumbled out. He was pale, his right arm bound in a bloody sling. He held a pistol in his left hand, his eyes wild and feverish with pain and humiliation. "Kill them!" Hale screamed. "What are you waiting for? Shoot them down!" He raised the pistol, aiming wildly at Caleb. The moment stretched, thin and brittle as ice. Caleb saw the intent in Hale's eyes. He saw the desperation of a man who knew his power was evaporating. Caleb's hand dropped to his revolver. He could draw. He could put a bullet in Hale's chest before the deputy could fire. It would be justified. It would be easy. But Caleb saw something else. He saw the hired men on the porch lowering their rifles. They were looking at Hale with disgust. They were looking at Rourke, who was backing away from his own rabid dog. If Caleb shot, he started a war. If he waited, Caleb did not draw. He sat his horse, staring Hale down. "Put it down, Tom," Caleb said. His voice was not a shout. It was a command, heavy with the weight of a man who has mastered his own violence. "It is over. Look around you. No one is shooting. You are all alone." Hale looked at Rourke. Rourke turned his back on him. Hale looked at the men in the bunkhouse doorway. They looked away. The deputy let out a sob of rage. He fired. The shot went wide, kicking up snow near Mara's horse. Before Hale could cock the hammer again, Marshal Davis fired his shotgun, not at Hale, but into the porch railing in front of him. The explosion of wood splinters sent Hale reeling backward. He tripped and fell hard on his wounded arm, screaming as the fight went out of him. Two of the marshal's men were off their horses in seconds, rushing the porch and kicking the gun away. They hauled Hale up and slapped irons on his wrists. Rourke stood alone on the porch. The silence that followed was absolute. Mara urged her horse forward. She rode past Caleb, past the marshal, until she was at the foot of the stairs. She looked down at Silas Rourke. "You called me by a name in your book," Mara said. Her voice was clear, carrying over the wind. "You called me Asset 12. You called me a thief. You called me a whore." Rourke looked up at her, his lip curling. "You are what you have always been. Girl, dirt from the mining camps." "I am Mara Mercer," she said. "I am a citizen, and I am the woman who burned your kingdom down with nothing but the truth." She leaned down, her eyes locking onto his. "You do not get to name me," she said, "and you do not get to own me. Not today, not ever again." She straightened up and looked at the marshal. "Take him." Rourke was not dragged away kicking and screaming. He surrendered with a sneer, adjusting his cuffs, telling Davis that his lawyers would have him out by dinner. He was loaded into a wagon, sitting stiff and upright, refusing to look at the people who watched him go. It was not a clean victory. There were no cheers from the townspeople who had ridden up to watch. There was only a quiet, uncomfortable shifting of feet. Men who had looked the other way for years now stared at their boots. The shopkeeper, Mr. Henderson, stood by his wagon, looking pale. They saw the ledger. They saw Hale in chains. They saw the truth of what they had tolerated. It was not a triumph. It was a reckoning. And reckonings are heavy things to carry. Caleb rode up beside Mara. He reached out and took her hand. "It is done," he said. "No," Mara said, watching the wagon disappear over the rise. "It has just started, but the hardest part is over." The return to the homestead was a journey into a different kind of reality. The barn was a blackened skeleton against the snow. The smell of wet ash hung heavy in the air. The cabin roof was scorched, and the porch was half burned. But the main structure, the solid, heartwood logs Caleb had hewn himself, still stood. They spent the first 2 days in a blur of exhaustion and labor. They had to secure the livestock that had scattered. They had to patch the roof before the next snow. They had to haul water and chop wood, the endless, repetitive arithmetic of survival. But something had changed. On the 3rd day, a wagon appeared on the road. It was Titus, the old neighbor who had warned Caleb about the wild woman. He pulled up to the yard, his mule blowing steam. He climbed down and unloaded 3 sacks of oats and a side of cured beef. He placed them on the porch without a word. "Titus," Caleb said, stepping out. "I cannot pay for that yet." Titus spat tobacco juice into the snow. He looked at Mara, who was sweeping soot from the doorway. He lifted his hat, a small, stiff gesture of respect. "Heard what happened?" Titus grunted. "Heard she stood up to Rourke. Heard you didn't shoot Hale when you could have." He kicked the dirt. "Reckon I was wrong about the trouble. Or maybe I was right. But it was the kind of trouble this valley needed." He climbed back into his wagon. "You need help raising a new barn. You send word. The boys. Well, we feel a bit foolish. We'll come." It was not an apology. It was an admission that the world had shifted. That night, the wind died down. The cabin was warm, the stove glowing red. They had pushed the bed closer to the fire. Caleb sat on the edge, cleaning his rifle. Mara was brushing her hair, the long, dark strands shining in the firelight. She put the brush down. She walked over to him. She took the rifle from his hands and leaned it against the wall. Then she stood between his knees, her hands resting on his shoulders. "You are quiet tonight," she said. "I am thinking," Caleb said. He wrapped his arms around her waist, resting his head against her stomach. "I am thinking about the man I was in Abilene, and the man I was on the porch with Hale. They are not the same man," Mara said. "I wanted to kill him." "Mara," Caleb said, his voice muffled against her dress. "When I saw him holding you, the darkness was there. It was so close." "But you didn't," Mara whispered. She ran her fingers through his hair, tracing the line of the scar on his jaw. "You chose. That is what matters. You chose to be Caleb Mercer. You chose to be my husband, not his executioner." She pulled back so she could look at his face. The bruises were fading, yellow and green shadows on his skin. "We are not clean, Caleb," she said. "I have my ghosts. You have yours. We are both scarred. We are both dangerous in our own way." "Yes," Caleb said. "Good," Mara said, "because the world is hard, and I do not want a soft man. I want the man who can stand in the storm and not break." She leaned down and kissed him. It was not the desperate, frantic kiss of the fugitive. It was slow. It was deep. It was the kiss of a woman claiming her territory. Caleb stood up, lifting her with him. She wrapped her legs around his waist, and he carried her to the bed. The intimacy that followed was a conversation without words. It was steadiness and hunger intertwined. It was the feel of calloused hands on skin that had known too much cold. It was the sound of breath catching in the dark, a reaffirmation that they were alive. They were safe, and they belonged to no one but each other. Spring came late to the Montana Territory that year. The snow retreated reluctantly, revealing the black earth and the green shoots of new grass. The creek swelled with runoff, roaring through the coulees. Caleb and Mara stood on the porch of the cabin. The new barn was half-framed, the yellow pine bright against the weathered gray of the house. A rider had come by that morning with the mail. There was a letter from Marshal Davis. Mara held it in her hand. "Rourke is out on bail," she said, reading the script. "His lawyers found a technicality in the arrest warrant. He is back at the RRR." Caleb looked out at the horizon. The news should have terrified him, but he felt a strange, granite calm. "He will not stop," Caleb said. "He will try again. Maybe not with guns this time. Maybe with money. Maybe with politics." "Let him try," Mara said. She folded the letter and put it in her pocket. "The federal investigation is still open. Davis says more women are coming forward. The cracks are spreading." "It will take years," Caleb said. "We have years," Mara said. She turned to look at the land. It was vast, indifferent, and beautiful. It did not care if they lived or died. It only asked that they be strong enough to stand on it. Caleb put his arm around her shoulders. He felt the solid warmth of her, the steel in her spine. She was not the plain, quiet bride he had asked for in his letter. She was something wilder, harder, and infinitely better. She leaned into him. They stood there, watching the shadow of a hawk circle over the grasslands. "Are you afraid?" Caleb asked. Mara looked at the horizon, then up at him. Her eyes were clear, the color of moss in a deep well. "Yes," she said honestly. "But I am not running." Caleb squeezed her shoulder. "Neither am I." They turned and walked back into the house, leaving the door unlatched, ready for whatever the wind would bring next. Thank you for journeying with me through the dust, the snow, and the hard-won love of Caleb and Mara. Stories of the American West are often painted in black and white, but I hope this tale showed you the gray areas where real life and real love happens. I would love to hear your thoughts on their story. Did Caleb make the right choice on the porch? Do you think Rourke will ever truly face justice? Please leave a comment below letting me know where you are listening or reading from. I am always amazed to see how far these stories travel. And if you enjoyed this ride, please subscribe to From Wild West for more tales of grit, passion, and the frontier spirit. Until next time, keep your powder dry.